Welcome back to the tropical greenhouse. It is mid-November and we're going to have a look at all sorts of things today. In particular, we're going to talk about downsizing pots, not upsizing pots. And we'll explain all the details as we work our way through. It's a vlog style, so I'm just going to kind of make it up as I go along, but I'm going to show you some specific things. My favourite Pelargonium, which is still in bloom. There's a couple of Pelargoniums in bloom. We're going to talk about chlorotic leaves on various plants and what I'm going to do about it, and various problems and challenges that you get in an autumn in a tropical greenhouse. So let's get cracking. And we are in, and I want to start with this Begonia longiciliata. So I'll just pick it up for you so we can have a look. So what have I done with this? Well, this thing hasn't done as well this year as it did last year, and I shall tell you for why. The reason is, and it looks pretty good here, the reason is that it has this tendency, as do many rhizomatous begonias. I'm struggling to hold this, it's quite heavy because I've put it in a heavier pot. What happens is the rhizome creeps along, gets to the side of the pot, goes over the edge of the pot, and then of course it has nothing else to root in, and it continually falls over. So what I had to do with this, because the rhizome was so big and it went off in various directions, I had to chop it off, and some of it I've actually repotted, the rest of them I had to bin them off. This one, in order to get it, this is the main mother plant, in order to get it into the pot so that it would fit with, just move around here, with the rhizome almost going off in the right direction. You can see here where I've chopped it off. I couldn't have got that so that it touched the media. It was just too high up, it was growing too high. So what I've done is I chopped half the roots off, because these are only very fibrous roots, and as you can see, I mean, I did this a couple of weeks ago and it's putting on new leaves already. It doesn't really stress it that much because it has this rhizome with all the goodness stored in there. So you'll find that with many rhizomatous plants, whether it be an orchid, whether it be a begonia, whatever it is, if it's got a rhizome, then it's got a store of something, some moisture, various nutrients and good stuff. So we did that in order to get it into the pot, and hopefully it will then shoot off in this direction. And I've also put it in a heavier pot so that it doesn't topple over. So it's not the best time to do it. I'm doing it in mid-November at the moment. What is it today? 16, 17, something like that. I forget. The only time I ever remember dates and days was when I was teaching. Don't remember it now because I don't write it anymore, so I forget. But yeah, it's looking okay. It seems to have benefited from it. Better to do it really springtime, anytime really when the temperatures are warm enough, but I have to do these things when I've got the time, and now is when I have the time. I'm not worried. I think it will still survive. I don't let it below 12 degrees Celsius in here. I think it'll cope. So one of the divisions that I chopped off, and here it is growing in this pot. So this one is basically just the rhizome just pushed ever so slightly down into the pot, and that will, believe it or not, root. It's rooted before for me, this kind of thing, not this specific plant. I'll show you one that has. So this down here is Begonia Black Fang, and this was one that I took a little bit of rhizome and rooted it. I've got several of these doing that, so that's what happens there. So Begonia longiciliata, that's what I had to do with it. And it will be fine. It will get along quite nicely, even though it's not the best time of the year to do it. This one is looking a little bit bedraggled, probably because it's not getting a lot of moisture at the moment because it's getting so cold. There's snow on the ground outside. It's very rare we actually get it in November, but this year it looks like we're due for a very cold winter. So that's Begonia longiciliata, and hopefully next year the main mother plant, and there it is, will look much better and much happier in its bigger, heavier pot and with more room to grow. That's Begonia longiciliata. So let's take you down to my species. I did a whole video on these new species that I bought, and here they are down here. Now, why have I got them on the floor? Let me just bob down here. Now, the reason is because I have them on a propagator. I fired up my propagator. I've got it out the hothouse. It was just sitting there collecting dust. And yeah, these plants, most people will be growing these species plants in terrariums and in warmer places. And obviously, as I say, at the moment it's very cold. It's only going down to 12 in here, and I am heating it to get it to that. Outside it's about 1 degree at the moment in the middle of the day. I know there are colder places, but it's still pretty cold, isn't it? So all of them are doing very well, by the way. That one, it is a species, Melanobulata, but I've just put that on there because I didn't divide that rhizome. I actually repotted it and moved it along to one side so that it had more space. So I'm kind of nursing Melanobulata through at the moment. It's still yet to show me some new growth, and it may not do until the temperatures begin to warm up. So as you can see, they're all doing okay. It's 2 weeks I've had these, and it probably was a bit of a shock for them to suddenly come down to these kind of temperatures. This is why sticking them on a propagator like this should, and I've only done this, I only did this 2 days ago because I just didn't get round to it. Really, I should have done it right from the start. They're okay, they're not rotting. There's a little bit of rot on that one maybe on the side there. They perked up pretty quickly after arriving in the post. This one looks like it's put a new leaf on. That one I'm not so sure about. That one, oh, there's a new leaf down there. Yeah, that's new. So that one's looking okay. That one's looking quite nice. Not a new leaf, but I mean, that one was already arrived with that new leaf, but it's looking perky. All of them are looking pretty perky. This one, by the way, isn't a begonia. That's what's that? Sonorilla, species Vietnam. Some people might know or recognise that one. I think it's a favourite for terrariums. Sophia just sent me those as a little freebie extra. They were unrooted cuttings, and I've basically just stuck them in a pot. Whether they will root or not remains to be seen. They are looking a little bit bedraggled at the moment. I did actually have that covered over, but you know, if it survives, great. If it doesn't, I'm not really massively bothered about that. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that there is one missing, and the one that's missing just happens to be the one that was my favourite. Typical, isn't it? I believe it was Begonia Dendrobium, and it was a lovely little thing, but it didn't last more than a couple of days. It began to rot very, very quickly, and it rotted in the stems for each leaf. And I took it in the house as soon as I could see what was happening, but it was too late. Each leaf rotted off, so that's quite a bit of money for that plant down the drain, but this is what happens if you're going to grow species. But on the whole, I'm quite happy with the way they're going at the moment. If they can survive this, these kind of temperatures, and yeah, I could have waited until midsummer, but I know that I've got to cope with them in a winter. So I really need them to be able to go down to these kind of temperatures, and most can. So when I lose one, I think that's pretty good, don't you? I'm quite happy with that. So that's the species begonias, the new species begonias recently arrived in the tropical greenhouse, doing okay and a little bit mollycoddled on this heated propagator, which is giving them a little bit of bottom heat. It goes up to 18 degrees Celsius, this propagator, and it turns itself on and off, you know, as and when, so it's a nice little thing to have. Okay, second go at filming this little section, but it does mean that I can be more succinct because I've already had a practice. So we're looking at something called humus and something called akadama. And why am I showing you these? Well, I have it on very good authority that if you are growing species like these down below that I've just been showing you, or if you are growing seeds of begonias, or if you've got a begonia species, like I've got many species here, or if you've got one that you're struggling with, then I believe this is a game changer for the media. Now, why is that? Well, I've always grown my begonias in multipurpose compost and perlite. And when you actually delve into it, you'll find that these two things do exactly the same as multipurpose compost and perlite, only better. They have the same characteristics, just more of it. Let me explain. So, humus. This comes under several names. This is actually worm casts, so you might see it as worm castings, worm humus, vermicompost is another name for it. Obviously, if you look into it, you'll see that it comes from worms. It passes through the digestive system of what are known as red wrigglers. tiny little thread-like worms that are used to break down like household waste, household compost, food waste, that kind of thing. And they come up with this mixture. Now, what's good about it, it has all the things that multi-purpose compost has, only more of it. So the NPK values of multi-purpose compost is pretty much the same proportions, just more of each. So for that reason, it's pretty good. It's very friable, which means that it's really crumbly, it doesn't clump as much. So not only does it have more nutrition, it's more airy, it gives off the nutrients over a longer period of time. It's very concentrated, so you don't need a lot of it, I believe. Akadama, which you would mix with the hummus. You could also mix some perlite in with it as well if you want. This comes from Japan, I understand, or originally it does. I don't know whether every single bag of Akadama originates in Japan, but I believe it's volcanic clay. Now, don't think of leca. It's not like the clay balls. It will break down over time, unlike leca. But this acts a little bit like perlite in as much as it is airy. It allows more air to get into the mixture. It will hold on to nutrients and slowly feed them back to the plant. It also will hold on to some moisture as well. And before I forget, this has more microorganisms than multi-purpose compost, which allows more of a nutrient passage or nutrient exchange between the plant's roots and the nutrients that's available. So, just as I said a minute ago, it's the same as multi-purpose compost and perlite, just better in every aspect of it. So give that a go. I've never tried it yet, but I am going to do. Obviously, I've only bought that after I've already potted these up in my own kind of airy mix. Maybe if I'd have used this in the first place, then I wouldn't have lost my Begonia Dendrobium. We'll never know. I don't know the actual proportions. I'm going to experiment a little bit, but this is so concentrated, I believe, that it's not a good idea to use a lot of it. So moving on, we're going to have a look at this Impatiens Nyamensis, which is always in bloom, always in full bloom. And it looks pretty good, considering we're in November. Don't forget, it is a tropical plant. I think that looks pretty nice. Only problem is the leaves are looking highly chlorotic. Now, we've been here before with this plant, and even though we might be heading into winter, we're in late autumn, aren't we now? I know what happens with it. It is a very, very heavy drinker, and because of that, it seems to be a heavy feeder as well. And obviously, the more I water it, the more all those nutrients are draining through the plant. And the last time I fed it with like a general purpose fertiliser, and it's done nothing. And you can see there are little bits of fertiliser, granular fertiliser still in there. I'm sure it does give it something, but this in particular responds very, very well to Epsom salts. So if I give it some Epsom salts, which I've done before, within a matter of weeks, it usually greens up. It's probably tempting to think, well, it's doing this because we're heading into winter, but I know from experience that it does this anyway, any time of the year. And it's a good little tip to think about whenever you get these kind of chlorotic leaves, is to give it some Epsom salts. Having said that, my Mandevilla sanderi gets yellow leaves, but it does that anyway because it's an evergreen and it loses these leaves once the temperatures drop. So I'm not that worried about that. I might give it some anyway in passing, see if it makes any difference. But it's nice to see this thing in bloom, even though we're heading into the coldest months. Nice little Dendrobium in bloom here. This is star class Apollon. This was a keiki several years ago. Off the main mother plant, which just happens to be over there in the corner, and that's got loads of buds on it. It's a little bit early, but who cares, you know? A bloom is a bloom, isn't it? So I'm going to keep watering those, I'm not going to give them a winter rest. Why would I give them a winter rest when they're in bloom? When they're in bloom, then they're going to need everything, aren't they? They're going to need the feed, they're going to need the water. Obviously, I'm not going to water them as much because they're not going to dry out as much because it's so cold in here and so humid. But yeah, I think that looks rather nice. I'm quite happy with that. That's a nice little thing. And there's plenty of buds dotted about the place. And then once those buds are over, and there's no sign of growth, then I will give it a winter rest. Okay, let's move on. So I'm going to take you to the beginning of my discussion on downsizing the pots. And we'll start off with this Pelargonium. This is Rushmore Rowan. This is quite a sizable plant. At the moment, bearing in mind we're in November, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bloom spikes on this with clusters. It's an absolutely beautiful plant, beautiful clusters of blooms, but look at the size of the pot. I'll just see if I can reach over here without knocking anything off. So if I just hold it to my hand there. So that is an 8 centimetre pot. I don't really want to do much more with it because it's I'm going to knock other things off. It's tiny, tiny little pot. Now, why have I not said to myself, right, oh, it's going to be a big plant, let's get it into a big pot? Well, we'll come to that. Just bear in mind, if you want a really good Pelargonium that blooms pretty much all year round, and if it does that in here at 12 degrees, no doubt it will do it in a house for even longer, providing that you've got enough light. Rushmore Rowan, look out for that one. Beautiful, beautiful hybrid. So we'll just bear that in mind. We'll keep that in our heads, that that one is in a very small pot. It's always worth looking at this Begonia Black Knight. Still an absolutely gorgeous, I think it's a cane begonia. It's kind of growing into a cane. A few little cute flowers on it there. The difficulty with it really is just keeping it down. Keeping some of these leaves, which get absolutely huge, but I have to keep chopping them off because it just falls over, and I don't want to put it in a bigger pot. Again, we'll come to that. Let's have a look at this one. So this is a tuberous begonia. Now, I'm often fond of saying that I don't grow tuberous begonias, and when I'm talking about those, I'm talking about the ones that you tend to get in garden centres. The really large flowered begonias. But there are lots of species begonias that are tuberous, which I may well grow at some point. And then there's this one. So this one is a very popular hybrid, Begonia boliviensis, and this particular hybrid is Firecracker. And it is a lovely thing. Beautiful blooms. Not very often I grow begonias for blooms, but this is one. This is great for hanging baskets, but the reason I point this out is because this one doesn't, in nature, the Begonia boliviensis species doesn't go into dormancy given the right conditions. You can keep it going all year long. Now, I actually let it go into dormancy last year because I hadn't totally genned up on the information for this particular plant, and it wasn't as big. It was a very, very small plant, and it really needed that dormancy. I'm right next to the heater here, so you probably just heard it kick on. So this thing didn't flower for me last year, as I say, very small, but just simply not enough light. Usually tuberous begonias, especially the hybrids, are real sun lovers, real light worshippers, and it just didn't have it last year. This year it's got more light and it's looked better. I really need to chop it right back. I've done that once already, but I'm going to do it again and get it to bush out, and let's see if next year we can get loads of blooms on that thing. So moving on over, we've got this Begonia Down Home. I'm a little bit worried about this type of begonia because generally these sort don't do that well for me at the lower temperatures, but this seems to be okay so far, and it can have gorgeous flowers on it and loads of them too, so let's hope when it comes round to the right time of the year. Curly Fire Flush, always looking great, and this one in particular at the moment is looking fabulous with those lovely red leaves and red hairs. It's a little bit dark over this side. I've had to turn the lights off because they flicker. So what else have we got to look at? Right, I did show a Coleus a few well, it's probably a couple of months ago now, and I chopped it right down, and this is the plant. I wanted to bush it out. It was about 2.5 feet tall in that pot, and it looked fabulous, but to get it through winter, I really needed to cut some of that top growth off. Now, I believe if you keep these in the house, they can look a lot nicer than that. Obviously, it's suffering for the temperatures, but one of those offcuts I planted, I actually did a few, I think I did 3. And I didn't even use rooting hormone. I just took an ordinary cutting just below a leaf node, put it in a pot. The other 2 rotted off, this one didn't. I only need 1, don't need more than that, so it's worth taking a few. That cutting has taken, so I'm quite happy with that. So let's have a look at another Pelargonium, and let's talk about pots again. This is Vectis glitter. Now, somebody asked on Instagram, would I show the whole plant? Well, there it is. Can you see the whole plant there? See, it is in an 8 centimetre pot. Now, this one is particularly nice. This is a Stella. And you always find a cluster. They've got these little red flecks on, but you usually find like the odd petal that's fully red. Now, there isn't one on that cluster. There usually is one on every cluster. Beautiful thing. Again, remember, it's mid-November. All my other Pelargoniums I have cut back, obviously, except if they are in bloom like this. This is a weird Pelargonium. It doesn't even look like a Pelargonium leaves. This was a new one last year, so I am waiting to see what that does. It's not really, I don't think it bloomed yet. So that is P. ardens. I know it's very, very thirsty plant. Let's see what that does. My Begonia Raja, first little bit of new leaf coming on that. I know I've mentioned this before, but I enjoy mentioning this, that a doctor of botany assured me that the leaves fall off this. We're now into the 3rd year I've had this, and hardly a leaf has fallen off it. I think we've got the same leaves as we had when we started. So that shows nobody knows everything. But it's coming good, it's coming better now. Get it into the light, and it's beginning to come. So we've got my Arachnoidea, repotted that. I have shown you that, haven't I? The Marmaduke, that seems to be a little bit like the Black Knight in that it's really going for it despite the temperatures. We've got a cutting I took of Begonia Autumn Ember. I've just give it a little bit of protection there, and that's going to go off to a friend of mine. I forgot to mention, I have shown in the past, again, lots of Achimenes. This one's just about hanging on, but the Achimenes will be going into dormancy. So the last time you saw this section, it was covered with all sorts of Achimenes trailing all over the place. That was one of them, and I've cut it back, some of the dead bits, and I've really reduced the watering on that, so that'll be having a little winter rest. So we're going to continue talking about pot downsizing as we move over to Streptocarpus. So let's talk about what happened to Streptocarpus. I didn't have any well, I did. I had some Mars Hydro grow lights, which were very, very bright, but they didn't last forever. They lasted me about 2 or 3 years. Both of them went at the same time, and I couldn't afford to replace them. I did have some cheaper lights in place, but they just weren't as bright. And what happened? Not a single flower on my Streptocarpus. I had other issues too. By the way, this is a Streptocarpus. Doesn't look like one, does it? This is, oh, it's hard to remember the name, Glandulocyssimus. Either go, who named that one? That is a species. Doesn't look like Streptocarpus, but let's see what happens to that one next year. So you might notice that I still have some blooms, even though I didn't have any blooms at all in midsummer. The leaves which were really, really yellow are now a lot greener. So I also fed them. Now, I wouldn't have fed them normally at this time of year, but because they were so stressed with the lower light levels, I felt they needed a real boost before going into like a winter quiet period. I really will reduce the watering as time goes on, and no doubt these leaves will begin to go more yellow again, and the blooms will drop off. But it's nice to see some bloomage even at this time of year. So they are coming back. I also had an infestation of bush snails, Bush snails are tiny, tiny little snails, a couple of metres across, and they're not native to the UK. They really come in orchid pots generally. Anything that's sent from a warmer country usually has some of these things in, and once you have them, it's pretty much impossible to get rid of them. I've tried all sorts of things, and you know what seems to have done it? Quite obviously, slug pellets. For some reason I thought these tropical snails wouldn't succumb to plain old slug pellets, but they did. And this is why my streptocarpus are looking much better. But the other issue, and this is what I said I would talk about, by the way, Harlequin Dawn, that one, looking nice. I had to go round and down pot some of these streptocarpus. I have down potted pelargoniums, down potted streptocarpus, down potted orchids. Why? Well, there is a fine balance. If your habitat, environment is of a kind that you have it warm in summer, but then very cold in winter, then you'll find that plants have like a natural maximum size that they can get to. And then after that maximum size has been reached and the temperatures drop, then a bigger pot or too big a pot becomes a hindrance for them. And I think it's the most natural thing in the world to think, right, I've got these plants, they're growing bigger, and if I can give them a bigger pot, then they will be able to spread out and just get into a bigger and bigger plant. Yes, to a certain extent, but then the temperatures will put a stopper on that, and the temperatures will then make a bigger pot be more of a hindrance to them and more of a liability to them than actually something that will give them something to spread their roots into. And this is true for orchids, it's true for streptocarpus, it's true for pelargoniums, and no doubt it's true for pretty much any plant that is generally tropical, but then you try and grow it in a cooler environment. And it is for that reason that I've gone around, had a look at some of these plants and thought, no, that pot is too big for that plant. You can tell because the plant doesn't grow. Here's one example. So this pelargonium I put in a bigger pot, and it's done absolutely nothing all year because it's been surrounded by a pot that it didn't have its roots in, which means that as soon as you water it, all that around the outside stays moist and wet, and the plant doesn't like it. As soon as you put it in a little pot, what happens? It begins to thrive again. And I've done that with several of my pelargoniums, and I've done it with several of my streptocarpus. So that's something worth thinking about. Have a look at your pots. Have you been too ambitious, and have you up-potted when you shouldn't have? The plant will tell you. You'll be able to see it will have a downturn in its performance, in its vigour, in its growth, and you'll wonder what's wrong with it. Why is it not growing? That could be the reason. So we've got the first Masdevallia ignea in bloom here. Always nice to see. Difficult to focus on though. We've got several bloom spikes coming up there. I have a twinkle here. Now I had a few twinkles at one point and they all got spider mite, and this is the only one that I saved, and I bought this in 2020, so it's taken, I'd say 3.5 years to recover. But boy, it's recovered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bloom spikes on it. That's going to be fantastic. And now that I know that I can grow them again, and I knew what the problem was, I shall be increasing my stock of twinkles again. We've got a sherry baby in spike there. Glad to see my Cuthbertsonii has recovered, and we seem to be doing all right with that. Let's hope that does some blooming soon. I've had to completely empty all these trays out. I left the same water in for way too long, and it got all gunky and horrible and full of algae, and of course the salts build up inside these pots and inside these trays, and that has knocked everything right back. So I could really do with repotting some of these. I've chopped quite a few of them back. I think a couple of them are pretty much empty pots now where the plants have died. There's a lesson to me to work less and spend more time in the greenhouse. Can't really do that, can you? But you know, this is what happens, unfortunately. For the best will in the world, you cannot keep on top of everything all the time. So it is cyclamen season, and we have some beautiful cyclamen. Worth looking at the leaves as well. If you do see some puckering on your leaves, remember Tarsonomid mite is at large. There you can see puckering on the leaves. I'm not going to do much with that at the moment. I'm not going to spray it just yet, but puckering is an absolute classic sign of Tarsonomid mite, or broad mite, I believe some people call them. So it's worth keeping on top of that. It's easy to get rid of them. It's just knowing that they're there. We also have this Begonia Corallina. Did struggle in the low light levels. This is why you've got these lovely red tinge, strangely enough. But since I got my grow lights, we have new leaves coming on that. I thought the temperatures would knock that back, but it doesn't appear to have happened. This one is probably my favourite in terms of leaf. I really love the leaves on this. It's a little bit slow with the flowers coming, but they will come. We've got pink ones, we've got, what's that, magenta. We've got these lovely ones. This is a new hybrid for me. I think I've shown it already, but it's really opened up. It's got the differently coloured sepals. That's a nice thing to see. It's nice to see new hybrids coming along. So that's a cyclamen. What other cyclamen have we got? My biggest, oldest plant just coming into bloom with these massive blooms. I mean, look at that for a leaf. Look at that for a cyclamen leaf. Absolutely a whopping leaf. Loads of blooms coming on that one, loads of buds. We've got the red one. This one is a petticoat one, another new hybrid. This one seems to be struggling a little bit. I think it's a little bit, it doesn't really like the moisture too much. It's kind of, looks like it's rotting off in places. It's probably just acclimatising. It's used to some nice warm coddling in a garden centre. We've got Sotoanum, which is going to come into bloom. Now, it's only got 2 bloom spikes this year, and I put that totally down to the fact that I've got half of it in the dark there. When I had it down here in the light, I got many more bloom spikes, but you know, there's only so many places available to have that kind of light coming. So what else have we got going on? My Gryphon here, it's getting to the point where the cold is beginning to knock some of these leaves back, and I expect it won't completely defoliate, but it will lose a lot of the leaves over time. We've got the green gecko here. I mean, that one is really solid. It just keeps going and going. It needs loads of water. And Nepenthes are beginning to put some new growth on now again. They have these spurts. It's nice to get these shiny peristomes. New peristomes coming. I am due a feed with these Nepenthes. I did feed them with fish flakes a few months ago. I've not done it since. I need to do it again. But the fish flakes got the mole mites, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to, I chuck them out. I'm going to have to get some more. We've got another one going to bloom soon up here. What's that one? That's the Laelia anceps. Things are happening. Another Dendrobium nobile down here, which is going to bloom hopefully very soon. And I cut all my Pelargoniums right back. And what I always do, when I cut them back, I take one of the cuttings and I pop it in the pot. So every single pot has a little cutting at the side. Some of them died, some of them survived. I didn't do anything with them, didn't coddle them in any way. I just popped them in the pot at the side. So I'll always have another little one coming there. Let's have a look at some more Nepenthes while we're here. What else have we got? We've got down here some nice new pictures on this one. This is Loei crossed with Ventricosa. Great hybrid, this one. The problem is, because the sun comes over there, they always turn that way, so I don't get to see them. They all turn in the other direction. I've shown you that one, haven't I? Let's have a look. I've also got, they're very sticky, some of these, which is, I guess, a good thing. Over in the dark here, I think that one needs repotting. I've had it in that pot for a number of years now. These couple over here, these were like quite juvenile plants. They're just getting to grow a bit more now, but again, they really need repotting. They need some fresh moss. That's a job that I will do pretty soon. I've got loads of plans for this year. Down here with another one of those Streptocarpus glandulosissimus, and basically all I did there was I was chopping that one down a little bit because it was getting too big and I wanted it to bush out. And one of the cuttings I took off, I just popped it in a pot, and now I've got two. Again, I don't tend to bother with putting it into rooting hormone unless I'm absolutely desperate for it to take. If I'm of a mind that it doesn't really matter if it does or it doesn't, I just pop it in the pot and forget about it. And more often than not, it does. You know, more often than not, it roots because they're great at rooting, aren't they? So yeah, this is where we are up to now. I think I've shown you everything that's going on at the moment. So let me know what you think about the up potting, down potting side of things. If there's anything I've missed, or is there anything you want to know about any of the plants I've shown you, or even if it's just to say hi and you liked this bit or you liked that bit or you didn't like this bit or that bit. You can see there a little bit of puckering on that one. I did spray that one a while back. There's another one there that's a bit slow getting going, another Cyclamen. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is basically just keep filming things as I do them, and if it's useful I will put it out there. If I think it's not worth looking at, then I will confine it to the deletion bin. Okay, that is it for now. I will see you on the next one. Bye.